Some killers stalk their victims in alleys. Others smile at them across a dinner table. From quiet towns in Canada to crowded cities in Japan, from isolated farmlands in Texas to the sterile corridors of suburban hospitals, these 5 murderers didn't just break the rules. They rewrote them. One poisoned his own wedding guests. Another trapped his victims in a room with no windows. One took organs and mailed them across state lines with handwritten poems. And another? He gave interviews while the bodies were still under his floor. These are the 5 most ruthless serial killers you've never heard of, and each one is more disturbing than the last. But here's where it gets even more twisted. Most killers leave behind clues. These 5 left behind messages, some in code, some in flesh, and one in the form of a fully scripted children's book that mapped out his crimes before he was even caught. Before I begin, tell us what country you're watching from in the comments. Please subscribe if you want more stories like this, because what you're about to hear, you won't find it on Netflix. Most weddings are about love, promises, and a future. But for Daniel Riker, his wedding was the final act in a plan he'd been working on for 8 years. No one in the church that day knew what he had done. Not his bride, not the guests, not the pastor. But Daniel had decided that if he had to smile through another lie, he would burn every connection he ever made. Riker wasn't a stranger to loss. His first fiancée, Lacey, died in what looked like a hiking accident in 2013. Her body was found at the base of a cliff with a snapped neck. Authorities said it was a tragedy. Riker played the grieving boyfriend. But what no one knew was that Lacey had just confessed, the night before, that she'd cheated. And worse, she was pregnant, and the baby wasn't his. He didn't scream. He didn't hit her. He waited, took her on a healing hike, and let gravity decide. But that was just the beginning. 2 years later, a woman named Karen, who worked with Daniel and started seeing him, died in a house fire. Arson investigators found traces of accelerant in the walls. But Daniel had already moved states, changed his name, left no trace behind. He collected women who hurt him and turned their punishment into performance. And by 2021, he was ready for his masterpiece. A public wedding where everyone who had ever betrayed him would be present. Every cousin who mocked his job, every uncle who doubted him, every ex who ghosted him. And yes, the bride, Heather, who had once told her friends he was just a backup plan. He had heard the recordings, he had read the texts, and instead of confronting her, he proposed. The venue was a repurposed barn in rural Kentucky. Dozens attended. Riker had insisted on cooking the wedding food himself, saying it was a personal touch. The guests laughed, clapped, took selfies. They didn't know he had been testing small doses of ricin for months, made from castor beans he grew in his shed. They didn't know he had already mixed the powder into selected dishes, only for those who had made it to his list: Heather's parents, her sister, his former boss, and Heather herself. After the vows, just as the couple was introduced, people started collapsing, gagging, vomiting. Panic erupted. Daniel calmly walked to the edge of the barn, took off his tie, and sat down. When EMTs arrived, he told them exactly what he did. But here's what made it worse. He said it was a purging of the guest list. He handed over a printed seating chart, color-coded by guilt. Heather survived, barely, but both her parents died, along with 11 others. Daniel's only regret? That more people didn't show up. He said he would have doubled the dose. The court declared him sane, unapologetic. When asked why he smiled during the sentencing, Daniel simply said, "Because for once, I was celebrated, and they finally tasted what they made me swallow." The barn was quiet when the sirens stopped. 13 people died that day, 11 from the initial exposure, 2 more at the hospital within 48 hours. But the rest of the world didn't even know who Daniel Riker was until day 3. That's when the press caught wind of the name and tied it to the unsolved hiking death of Lacey Palmer from 2013. Investigators in Colorado reopened the case. The photos from that hike resurfaced, the final one showing Lacey with a faint bruise under her eye and Daniel's hand just barely gripping her shoulder a little too tightly. They found a deleted voice memo in an old iCloud backup where Lacey said, "If anything happens to me on this trip, it was Daniel." Suddenly, the ricin wedding wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Karen's death in the house fire? Investigators returned to the original insurance report. Daniel had taken out a $400,000 life policy on her just 7 months before she died. He was the beneficiary. No autopsy had been performed due to the severity of the burns. But a neighbor now recalled the smell of gasoline and seeing Daniel leave hours before the fire started. By week 2, Daniel was facing triple murder charges from his past, on top of 13 counts of homicide and 7 counts of attempted murder from the wedding day. The trial was held in Louisville with heavy media coverage. Cameras weren't allowed inside the courtroom, but every word leaked out. And what disturbed people most wasn't the scale of death. It was how calm Daniel was. No twitch, no tremble, no regret. When survivors described the vomiting, the seizures, the chaos, he simply tilted his head as if listening to music. His defense tried to plead for diminished capacity, but Daniel corrected his own lawyer during cross-examination. "Don't insult me," he said. "Everything was measured." The judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing. Daniel stood up, looked at the families of the dead, and said, "You didn't like me when I was quiet. You hated me when I begged. Now you'll remember me forever." That line made national headlines, but it wasn't the most disturbing part. 2 weeks after the trial ended, police found something else, an unlisted YouTube channel with private videos, 36 in total, all dated over the last 8 years, each one titled after a name. Inside those videos, Daniel speaking to the camera, practicing how he would say goodbye, rehearsing fake apologies, laughing, crying. In one, he even imitates Lacey's scream as she fell, then claps. The FBI confirmed the videos were filmed months, even years, before the wedding. Daniel had documented his emotional breakdown like a deranged director crafting a film. It wasn't impulse, it wasn't mental illness, it was production. Cold, planned vengeance. When the court saw this footage, they removed all options for parole. He received 15 life sentences without possibility of release. But even in prison, he manipulated attention. He sent handwritten letters to crime reporters, ranking each victim by what they meant to him. His writing was clear, clean, almost poetic. But here's where it gets worse. One of his letters ended with a single question. What if this was just the reception? Authorities searched every property he'd ever rented, every storage unit, every digital backup. They found nothing else, but the fear lingered. Because Daniel Riker didn't see himself as a killer. He saw himself as a host, and in his mind, his party had just begun. Most people assumed Daniel Riker was a statistical anomaly, a uniquely American explosion of vengeance. But that's the lie we tell ourselves when horror comes from home. Because across the ocean, in a quiet part of Western Japan, another man was preparing something far worse. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want attention. What he wanted was to play God. His name was Kazuo Nita. And from the outside, he was everything Japan admired. Neat, soft-spoken, respectful. He wore the same black-rimmed glasses every day, tucked in every shirt, paid in cash, never raised his voice. For 22 years, he taught primary school biology at a mid-size academy near the coast of Yamaguchi Prefecture. Not one complaint, not one reprimand. In fact, His students often called him Nita-sensei with warmth, saying he taught like a grandfather. He'd bring live frogs into class to teach anatomy, show old butterfly collections from his university days, and host science camps in the summer. Parents trusted him. The school trusted him. Even the Ministry of Education had given him 2 quiet awards for excellence. But Kazuo had another project, something no one saw, something he called the marionette study. And it wasn't in any textbook. Starting in 2004, Kazuo began quietly selecting specific students. Never from his own class, always from different grades, girls, ages 9 to 12. He would approach their families after school, offering free tutoring for university prep. Japan's academic culture is brutal, and for rural families, help from someone like Nita-sensei felt like winning the lottery. He'd come over once a week with worksheets and flashcards. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes simple toys for focus. But what parents didn't know is that Kazuo had installed a small infrared camera inside his wristwatch. It captured each session, not for educational review, but for a bizarre obsession Kazuo was nurturing. He wasn't filming anything graphic. That wasn't his sickness. What he wanted was obedience. The way a child paused when asked to solve a problem. The way their fingers froze when they got something wrong. He logged every blink, every hesitation, every correction. He recorded 123 children over the course of 12 years, never repeating a student. And with each video, he would create a log file, noting psychological markers like resistant, pliable, ready. At night, he would rewatch the tapes and annotate new commands to try. But here's where it gets chilling. In his home, hidden in a walk-in closet behind a false wall, police later found what he called the marionette archive. It was not digital. Everything was physical. Printed screenshots, handwritten notes, paper files, and crude mechanical drawings. Inside were detailed puppet diagrams where Kazuo had traced the limbs of each student into anatomical schematics. Underneath, he labeled string positions, where control points could be applied, where obedience could be reinforced. But it wasn't fantasy, it was engineering. Because Kazuo's real obsession wasn't with watching the students, it was mimicking them. At the back of the archive sat something no one was prepared for. 3 full-size human mannequins, each crafted to look like former students. One had working eyes that moved, one had ball-jointed elbows controlled by a wire rig. And one, the largest, had a vocal module inside that played back phrases Kazuo had recorded during tutoring. He had built his own classroom, a private replica of the real one, and every puppet obeyed him. Police later found old videos on mini-DV tapes where Kazuo stood in front of the mannequins, dressed in his teacher clothes, giving lectures, while the puppets sat silently at desks, staring at him. The footage is deeply unsettling. The entire operation unraveled in late 2016 after one of the parents found a strange metal box in their daughter's school bag. It was a transmitter Kazuo had been testing, meant to send live biometric data to a small receiver in his closet. The family brought it to school, assuming it was part of a new project. But a younger staff member flagged the device and notified the principal. From there, the police were called. They raided Kazuo's home and uncovered everything. The tapes, the diagrams, the mannequins, and a log of every child he had ever tested. But here's what made it worse. The names weren't real. He had assigned each child a number. And in the archive, each puppet didn't carry a name or a photo, just a number. And a score, obedience levels, emotional malleability, and response latency, all rated like AI training data. Authorities were stunned. There had been no physical assault, no direct abuse. Every session had been under parental supervision. Every test appeared innocuous. But the psychological manipulation, the obsessive tracking, The mannequins built to replace living children? The courts didn't know how to charge it. Kazuo was ultimately indicted on charges of illegal surveillance, child endangerment, and unlawful data possession. But he served only 4 years, and when he was released in 2020, he disappeared. No registered address, no digital footprint. One detective later said, "He didn't break the law. He bent it around himself, like string on a puppet." Most killers end their stories in courtrooms, mugshots, media headlines. But Kazuo Nita's story didn't end at all, because 4 years after his conviction, when he stepped out of the detention center in Yamaguchi, there were no cameras, no protests, not even family waiting. The press had long moved on, distracted by newer scandals. His name was briefly floated on national talk shows, but the public didn't understand how to feel about him. There was no gore, no screams, just precision, puppets, control, so they let it fade. And that's exactly what Kazuo wanted. He vanished into the countryside under a new name, reportedly using a forged identity provided by an old colleague. Authorities say he relocated to the Tohoku region far north and has not reoffended. But what they don't know is what neighbors later told investigators, that a retired craftsman had moved into a tiny home at the edge of town, quiet, polite, with a fascination for wooden dolls. They described small shipments of latex, motor parts, and resin delivered monthly. One neighbor mentioned hearing music late at night, children's songs. But here's where it gets disturbing. In 2023, nearly 7 years after his arrest, a former student recognized a puppet online. It had appeared in a video on a Japanese maker's forum, a mechanical doll that blinked and bowed like a student. The girl, now 22, identified the uniform, the exact facial mole, the voice clip used in the video. It was her, not a resemblance. Her. The video was posted anonymously, but internet sleuths tracked the upload to a server located in Aomori Prefecture, in the same district where Kazuo was rumored to be hiding. They couldn't prove it was him. But what followed next was undeniable. 6 more videos, all different mannequins, all different girls, each with subtle, strange movements, each rigged to obey specific gestures, raise a hand, nod at a word, flinch at a phrase. Viewers described the clips as hauntingly accurate. No overlays, no animation, just hardware. One puppet had tear ducts installed, another had a functioning throat node, allowing it to cough or giggle. The 7th video showed 3 puppets arranged in a classroom setting, identical to the hidden closet archive police had dismantled years earlier. Except this time, the classroom wasn't in a closet, it was rebuilt, repainted, expanded. Kazuo had started again. When detectives petitioned for a new warrant, the court denied it, citing lack of direct evidence and Kazuo's clean post-prison record. He hadn't harmed anyone physically. He hadn't even contacted the former students, but parents across Japan began pulling children from private tutoring centers. The phrase Nita syndrome began trending, used to describe invisible manipulation masked as mentorship. And the school where he once taught? They quietly erased his records, burned his photos, removed his awards from the cabinet. But survivors remember, especially the girl who saw her puppet blink on screen. In a recent podcast, she said, "I think he made us so he wouldn't need us anymore." And somewhere in a dim room in northern Japan, the puppets are still listening. Kazuo Nita controlled people with strings, but never left a single mark. His tools were quiet, invisible, psychological. But not every killer needs subtlety. Some prefer the sound of bones cracking beneath ice, the silence of an unmarked truck in a frozen prairie. Because while Japan was reeling from whispers and mannequins, Canada was facing something worse. A man who didn't manipulate his victims. He erased them. And no one saw it coming because he didn't hide in alleyways or basements. He hid in routine, in service, in the back seat of your own truck. This next killer didn't just break trust. He used it as bait. His name was Derek Colson, or at least that's what the uniform said. For years, he drove for the Canadian Polar Supply in Saskatchewan, hauling generator parts, heating oil, and frozen food between tiny outposts on the tundra. Everyone knew his truck. Bright yellow with a cracked moose decal on the side. Friendly wave, coffee breath, always on time. He was the kind of man who remembered your dog's name, gave extra insulation panels to broke families, and once fixed a nun's van for free in -40°C wind. But between 2012 and 2018, 6 women vanished along his route. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police chalked it up to exposure. The area was infamous for whiteouts and abandoned service roads. But the families didn't buy it. None of the women had survivalist training. None left notes. And all 6 had recently moved, switching jobs, transferring schools, or trying to start over. That phrase kept coming up, starting over, as if someone had convinced them to. What the RCMP didn't know was that Derek had a second phone and a second life. In forums under the alias Northern Reset, he advertised remote cabins to run away, heal, and begin again. His posts targeted women in transition, breakups, divorces, custody battles. He promised fresh air, no judgment, and full privacy. All they had to do was meet him for pickup on the edge of the supply route. He even made them sign contracts, not digital, handwritten, terms like no communication with prior contacts, no cell service expected, healing is self-directed. He called the place the snowpack, but no cabin ever existed. No road ever forked where he claimed it did, just deep woods and an ice shelf where tire tracks disappeared. In 2019, a freak thaw exposed something that changed everything. A rusted oil drum filled with charred bones, zip ties, and teeth. Forensics matched the molars to a woman named Tanya R., last seen entering Derek's truck in 2015. That discovery led to a raid of Derek's garage, where they found 6 steel toe tags, each labeled with initials matching the missing women. His laptop contained coordinates, dates, and a chilling folder titled After. Inside were 6 videos, not of violence, but of monologues. Each woman sitting in front of a camera, reading what appeared to be therapy letters, all starting with, "I release." They seemed calm, rehearsed, and at the end of each video, Derek's voice, off camera, would say, "You're ready now." The final entry? A close-up of snow falling over a lake, a single pair of boots, and the words, "The pack is complete." He never denied any of it, just smiled during interviews and asked if they watched the snow film. No one knows what that means. But here's where it gets worse. By the time Derek Colson stood trial, the media had already christened him the snowpack driver. The courtroom was packed with families, press, and a rotating team of psychologists trying to define what kind of monster sits calmly through footage of women vanishing forever. But Derek never twitched. Not when they played the recovery drone footage. Not when they displayed the after files. And not even when they found the final pair of initials carved into the underside of his steering wheel, ones that hadn't been linked to any missing person. The judge asked him what they meant. Derek only said, "That one never got picked up." But here's the part no one talks about. During evidence processing, they found receipts, not just for fuel or rope, but for lumber, hand saws, window panes, and a shipment of insulation. The address? A GPS marker in the northern Rockies, exactly where Derek claimed the cabin was. A rescue team was flown in. What they found was worse than a lie. There was a structure, but it was never finished, No doors, no floor, no plumbing, just a cold shell of pine boards, partially built with one thing inside, 6 folding chairs, each facing the center of the room. And nailed into the ceiling beam above them, a small, battery-operated camcorder. The footage inside was corrupted, but the data log showed the camera had recorded for exactly 72 minutes, 6 times. No audio, no survivors. Derek's trial ended in a life sentence without parole, but he never made it past year 2. In 2021, he was found in his prison cell, sitting cross-legged on the floor, hands folded, eyes open. Cause of death, hypothermia. Inside a heated, locked cell, his core temperature had dropped to 29 degrees Celsius. No broken window, no malfunctioning vent, just one piece of paper on the floor beside him, a folded printout of his own face. The back read, "I'm ready now." Authorities sealed his personal effects, but investigators say they still receive emails from a dead account. The subject line always reads the same: "Cabins still open." But what happens when a killer doesn't lure victims away at all? What happens when he walks right into your home while you're still in it? Some killers use rope, others use ice. But this next one? He used etiquette. While Derek Colson lured strangers into nowhere, the dinner guest walked straight through their front doors, invited. He didn't leave blood trails. He left empty wine glasses. From Seattle to Minneapolis, 5 couples were found dead in their homes, always after a formal dinner party. No signs of forced entry, no screams heard, no evidence of struggle. Just an empty chair pulled away from the table, a chair no one remembered inviting. His real name was Warren Tisdale. He was 52 when they caught him, clean-shaven, smiling, and holding a bottle of Bordeaux at the doorstep of his 6th target. He wore cufflinks, carried a monogrammed napkin, and had RSVP'd to an invitation no one sent. But he knew the names of their kids, their wedding song, even the name of the wine they'd joked about serving. Warren had a gift: social camouflage. He'd study victims for months, intercepting emails, tracing food orders, watching from park benches, even posing as a grocery delivery man. Then, on the perfect evening, when stress was low and music was playing, he'd ring the bell holding a bottle of their favorite red and say, "Sorry, I'm late." Once inside, he was a dream guest, charming, helpful. He even cleaned dishes. But dessert was always the same: homemade dark chocolate mousse. They'd all eat it. He never did. Within the hour, hearts slowed, speech slurred. Guests slumped in their chairs while Warren raised a toast to quiet endings. And then he vanished. No car scene, no camera caught him. Even the mousse dishes were rinsed and placed in the dishwasher, still warm when detectives arrived. All he left behind was a handwritten note under the wine bottle. "Thanks for the lovely evening. See you next time." But here's where it gets disturbing. Warren didn't choose victims randomly. All 5 couples had something in common. Each had reported a breakup with another partner just weeks before their death. And in each case, that ex-partner had died under unusual circumstances too. Some by accident, others by suicide. Warren, it turned out, had dated, or stalked, one member of each couple nearly 15 years earlier. He watched them move on, fall in love, and build lives he was never invited into. So he made himself a guest again, their final one. But what happens when love turns not into jealousy, but ritual? The investigation into Warren Tisdale was slow, not because there wasn't evidence, but because there was too much of it. Canned emails, friendly texts, voicemails full of charm. None of it pointed to a killer. It pointed to a man everyone liked. To police, Warren was a polite neighbor. To co-workers, a little boring but sweet. To the victim's friends, he was that guy we sort of knew from way back. He never gave people a reason to look deeper. That's what made him so dangerous. He didn't just blend in, he became part of the fabric. Detectives only made progress when they started looking at the lives of the victims before they met each other. One by one, they found the same pattern. The man in the first couple, he had dated a woman named Rachel in college. Rachel died in a bathtub fall 6 years later. The woman in the second couple, she had an ex-boyfriend named Daniel. Daniel was found frozen in a car outside his cabin, engine off, tank full. The stories didn't make sense until detectives dug into those deaths and realized each of those exes had some connection to Warren. An old roommate, a co-worker, a shared therapist. He was always near, always invisible. Warren's true motive wasn't revenge in the usual sense. He didn't rage, he didn't scream, he didn't leave violent scenes. What he wanted was deeper, more controlled. He wanted to sit at the table, literally, to be part of something that had moved on without him. Every couple he killed had once replaced him, and by re-entering their lives as the polite dinner guest, he was erasing that replacement, on his terms. He would arrive in a tailored suit, always on time, always holding the perfect bottle of wine. He didn't knock loudly, just one soft ring of the bell, and then a smile. "Sorry I'm late." No one ever asked how he knew where they lived. He was so confident, so familiar, people assumed someone else had invited him. Once inside, he became their favorite guest. Funny, gentle, a good listener. He didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't interrupt. He made them feel important, the way he used to feel around them. And then he served the moose. The poison was never the same. One couple was sedated with benzodiazepines. Another had a rare nerve agent only found in research labs. He studied their medical histories in advance to avoid interactions that might show up in toxicology. He even adjusted the dosage based on weight, age, and heart condition. That's how careful he was. He didn't want chaos. He wanted a peaceful goodbye, the kind he felt he never got. He cleaned up after himself, wiped counters, took out the trash. In one case, he even fed the victim's dog and left the TV on low volume to calm it. Police say he only stayed long enough to watch them fall asleep and never waited for death. That wasn't the part that interested him. The act of killing wasn't the goal. The moment of inclusion was. The dinner, the warmth, the illusion that he still belonged in their lives, even if just for an hour. When they finally caught him, it wasn't because of a mistake. It was because of timing. He showed up at a couple's home 2 days early. They were out of town, but the neighbor was watering plants and found it odd that a man in a suit was knocking at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. She took a photo. That photo went to the cops, and when they matched it to a traffic camera a mile away, they had his plate. Warren was arrested in his car with a bottle of wine in the passenger seat and a printed email invitation that no one remembered sending. His trial was short. He didn't deny the murders, he just sat quietly. No emotion, no regret. When asked why he did it, he said, "I wanted to feel like I mattered again." The courtroom fell silent. There were no outbursts, no tears, just quiet horror. The kind that comes from realizing someone could kill without hate, just loneliness. But the most chilling part came after sentencing. Investigators found a locked cabinet in Warren's home. Inside were 6 detailed binders, each labeled with a name. They included surveillance photos, grocery lists, table seating arrangements, and printouts of text exchanges. One binder was labeled with a name police didn't recognize. That woman is still alive. She had broken up with Warren 12 years ago, and she had recently gotten engaged. He hadn't killed her. Not yet. They believe she was meant to be his final dinner. And here's the part that still haunts detectives. She had just started planning her engagement party. When police checked her email, they found a draft invitation. The kind you never send. The kind you print and revise. Somehow, Warren already had a copy. So how did he get it? No one knows. But the theory is, Warren wasn't just good with charm. He was good with code. His job? IT security analyst for a medical data company. He had access to tools that allowed him to breach private servers, read email metadata, and even spoof invite confirmations. For years, he'd been lurking inside his victims' digital lives, watching their relationships bloom, waiting until the right night to step in. The woman who survived now lives under a different name. Police never told her the full story. They didn't need to. When she saw Warren's photo on the news, she fainted. It wasn't just that she recognized him. It was that she had just printed her wedding menu. And under dessert, she had written, "Dark chocolate mousse." She swears she never told anyone that, not even her fiancé. But Warren knew, because the dinner guest always did. Warren Tisdale killed to feel included again. He didn't scream, chase, or strike. He just knocked, smiled, and slipped back into the warmth of lives that had moved on. But inclusion was never the goal for the next man. He wasn't trying to belong. He wasn't trying to be remembered. In fact, he wrote every word of his life with one goal in mind: to disappear. Not vanish in a way that made people wonder. Vanish in a way that left no one asking at all. Because to him, the real crime wasn't murder. It was being noticed. Now we go to Japan, and to the widower who became a ghost long before he died. His name was Takashi Morimoto, a quiet man in his mid-60s who lived in a gray apartment above a shuttered bookstore in Yokohama. To his neighbors, he was invisible, the kind of man you nod at but never speak to. The type who checks his mail at night, waters his plants with a plastic cup, and eats alone at the same corner ramen shop every Saturday. No one knew what he used to do for work. No one asked. And that's exactly how he wanted it. Because Takashi used to write television shows. Long ago in the 80s, he had a brief moment of fame, a quiet writer for a children's puppet series that was canceled after 2 seasons. His name appeared in tiny credits. His paychecks were enough to live on, but not enough to matter. When the show ended, he took odd jobs, subtitling foreign films, proofreading anime dubs, even writing apology letters for a funeral home chain. But his name stopped appearing in public. His words became hired hands. Then one day, his wife got sick. Lung cancer. She died 6 months later. After her funeral, Takashi never wrote another word for anyone else. But he started writing something for himself. A script. Not for TV, not for film, for life. He titled it The 100 Silent Deaths. It wasn't fiction. It was a blueprint, a manuscript of targets, methods, and scenes, each one choreographed to feel like an accident. Every line written in soft pencil, each paragraph timed to real train schedules, neighborhood habits, traffic light cycles. He wrote it like a television show. Each episode had its own theme. One was about forgetting. One was about routine. One was about sound. The final one was titled The Perfect Ending, but police never got to read it because Takashi burned the pages one by one after each killing. And he killed 43 people. Every single one of them had one thing in common. They made someone feel forgotten. The school principal who laughed at a bullied girl's suicide note. The old man who refused to feed his disabled wife. The office supervisor who forced a widow to retire early. Takashi kept a list. He sat in parks with a cheap flip phone, eavesdropped in clinics, followed nurses into family courts, read local message boards, and memorized subway conversations. He didn't care who the victims were. He cared who they had hurt. Takashi believed that the worst kind of cruelty wasn't violence. It was silence. The kind of silence that eats through someone after they've been dismissed, ignored, erased. He called it soul starvation. And in his eyes, he wasn't a killer. He was a corrector. but no one ever saw him. That was the terrifying part. He used no force. He never broke into homes. He never carried a weapon. Instead, he created moments. One man slipped on wet tiles outside his dental office. Investigators thought it was just a leak, but it wasn't. Takashi had been spraying a thin coat of invisible algae solution for 3 nights with a gardener's bottle. Another woman fell from her apartment balcony. The railing had been slightly loosened, just one screw, during a building inspection she never verified. Takashi posed as a clipboard inspector, wearing a fake uniform sewn from flea market clothes. The real inspector arrived 2 days later. By then, she was already gone. Each death looked like bad luck. A traffic incident, a stairway misstep, carbon monoxide from a faulty heater. But when police finally started connecting them, it was already too late. 38 victims were buried or cremated with no autopsy. It wasn't until victim 39, a middle-aged nurse, that someone looked closer. Her son, a software engineer, noticed that her heater wasn't faulty at all. He found a deliberate blockage in the exhaust pipe, made of wax, cotton, and a melted CD jewel case. Too neat to be random, he posted his findings anonymously, and that's when people started seeing patterns. But even then, Takashi wasn't caught, because he had already disappeared. He left no fingerprints, no DNA, no purchases, no bank trails. He used cash only. He wrote on recycled receipts and kept notes on the back of business cards. He wore surgical gloves when handling doorknobs. He shaved his entire body every week. He cleaned public restrooms before and after using them, not out of fear, but out of habit. He once spent 4 months pretending to be a mute janitor at a university just to get access to a professor who had once humiliated a grieving student. He didn't rush. He didn't boast. He waited. And when it was over, he always did the same thing. He'd walk to the nearest vending machine, buy a single bottle of green tea, sit on a bench, and watch people pass by. Then he'd go home and write the scene in his notebook, only to burn it before dawn. Takashi didn't kill for satisfaction. He didn't enjoy the act. What he enjoyed was balance. A moment where silence was finally paid back. He believed in symmetry, in giving those who erased others a quiet ending of their own. But no killer, no matter how invisible, is truly invisible forever. So how did they catch him? It wasn't a fingerprint. It wasn't DNA. It was a pattern and a fire alarm. On the night of his 44th planned kill, Takashi was burning his next episode's script in the alley behind a bookstore when a smoke detector malfunctioned and triggered a building alarm. A patrolling officer just happened to be across the street. Takashi didn't run. He simply bowed. The officer found a bag near him. Inside were 43 burnt paper clips, a list of apartment numbers, and a single folded note that read, "The script ends here." But it didn't, because what police found next was worse. They brought Takashi Morimoto into custody at 3:14 a.m., still holding the green tea bottle. He said nothing, didn't ask why he was being arrested, didn't request a lawyer. The interrogation footage showed an eerily calm man. He nodded when spoken to, bowed when officers entered, but refused to answer a single question. Not out of defiance, out of principle. Investigators later realized Takashi had already written this part. It was in the folder they found hidden beneath the floorboards of his apartment, titled simply, "The Last Interview." But the real horror wasn't just what he wrote, it was what he left behind. In that apartment, police found 43 used erasers, each one stored in its own labeled Ziploc bag, each labeled with a single word: forgotten, dismissed, invisible, discarded. Words that matched the alleged sins of each victim. They found matchboxes with labels like Scene 12, Heater, Scene 19, Wet Tiles, Scene 31, Banana Peel, Properties, Stage Directions. This wasn't a killing spree, it was a performance. Takashi hadn't murdered people. He had scripted them out of existence. But one final folder changed everything. Inside it was a full-length manuscript, 154 pages, typed, bound. It was a memoir, a confession, and it was titled, "The Ones Who Left Her." Not him, her. Because none of this began with Takashi. It began with his wife, Misaki. In the manuscript, Takashi detailed her decline after her lung cancer diagnosis. But he focused less on her physical pain and more on the emotional silence she suffered. Doctors who didn't explain, nurses who rushed her, neighbors who avoided eye contact, relatives who didn't visit, old friends who said she's strong but never showed up. Even the funeral home sent a junior apprentice to handle her cremation. Someone who spilled her urn and giggled nervously while sweeping it up. Takashi never got angry, not outwardly, but he took notes. He listed every name, every instance, every moment where his wife had to swallow the bitter silence of being unwanted while dying. He wrote, "Her suffering wasn't from cancer, it was from being erased before she was even gone." The script was his way of writing her back into existence. He called each kill a counter-silence, a moment where someone who caused emotional starvation would be met with poetic oblivion. But Takashi never saw himself as a hero. In fact, he referred to himself only once in the manuscript. "I am the pause before the closing credits." He believed he was a temporary instrument, that after 100 corrections, he would vanish. Not flee, not escape, just stop. He had prepared everything: a prepaid cremation, an unmarked plot, a sealed final copy of his script to be buried with him. He didn't plan to survive past the last episode. And the chilling part? He was 56 episodes in, which means 44 more people were on the list. When investigators combed through the rest of the folders, they found chilling details. A hospital janitor who shushed a grieving son, a daughter-in-law who refused to care for her stroke-stricken father, a principal who altered a suicide note to protect the school's image. Takashi had plans for all of them: the dates, the setups, the properties. Every step had been rehearsed in his notes, adjusted with precision like camera blocking. The media didn't know what to call him. Some dubbed him the scripted killer. Others called him the eraser. But one headline stuck: "The man who killed for ghosts." The public didn't know whether to hate him or mourn him. Because the more they learned, the more unsettling the pattern became. Every person he targeted had never technically broken the law. That's what terrified people. They weren't murderers. They were dismissers, neglectors, ghost makers. People who looked the other way when someone cried, who rolled their eyes at pain, who told widows to move on and bullied the grieving into silence. And the worst part? Everyone knew someone like that, which meant everyone was looking over their shoulder, but the law didn't care about poetic vengeance. Takashi was charged with 43 counts of murder, suspected in dozens more, and held without bail. His trial was scheduled for May 12th, but it never happened. On April 29th, guards found Takashi lying still in his cell, face turned toward the wall, eyes open. He wasn't breathing. There was no note, no suicide method found, no wounds, no poison. Just one strange object left on the pillow beside him, a blank VHS tape, labeled in tiny faded marker, "Final Episode." It was tested. It was blank. No footage, no data, just static. But the coroner noticed something. The tape's magnetic strip had been cut into with what looked like a sewing needle, barely visible. Inside the wound, under magnification, were microscopic indents, dashes, slashes, tiny curves. It wasn't static. It was writing. Takashi had used a sewing needle to inscribe kanji characters into the magnetic tape itself, creating a microscopic suicide note so small it could only be seen with a scanner. Investigators translated it. The final line said, "I am not the story. I am just the silence between scenes." After that, people argued about him for months. Was he a vigilante or a narcissist? A monster or a martyr? Some thought he exposed the emotional violence society ignored. Others believed he exploited grief for his own drama. But the fear remained, because 44 names were still on that list. And even though Takashi was gone, his script might not be finished. Some killers hide in shadows. These didn't. They smiled, waited, and struck with purpose. Love, betrayal, obsession. Each one left a scar no one could erase. Quiet, methodical, unforgettable. You won't see them in movies, but now you've seen the truth. And you'll never look at people the same again.